In this video, we're going to take a look at V-Ray for Nuke's ability to go from nothing to a rendered element in a really short amount of time. We'll also take a look at the V-Ray material preview node and how you can rapidly develop a look of a shader using just the V-Ray material node or the shading network you create and the V-Ray material preview without having to set up an entire scene. So another really cool feature of V-Ray for Nuke is the V-Ray material preview. In this node, the defaults are to provide a preview HDR and a preview geometry. You can change the geometry, the HDR, and even the lighting style, and even the format to make it higher resolution if you want to see more detail. So let's change the geometry to cloth and the HDR to Sunset 2. We'll change the format to 512, and so now that I have that set up, I can jump straight into developing a look in my material without having to set up any other nodes. So for this V-Ray material, I'll change the diffuse color to a value of 1 for red and 0.25 for green and blue, and then I'll add a little bit of reflection in, and we're good to go. So now I'll set up a proper V-Ray scene. So I'm setting up the same scene that I set up in the first quick start tutorial. These are some basic nodes, and so the values are appropriate for this particular geometry that I'm going to be using. I'm also loading in an HDR for my V-Ray light dome. And cleaning up the scene a bit so we can have exactly what we want to see. So now I've got some geometry and a HDR feeding into a light dome. Now we can start to play with materials. So now I add a V-Ray material and a apply material, and I'm going to label these rust, and I'll add a second V-Ray material and label this metal. Duplicate the apply material. I'll apply the rust material to the frames and the metal to the sphere. So now we'll start to modify the materials. We'll set a light rust color for the frames, and we'll add a darker rust color for the sphere. So now that I know that these two materials are assigned to the geometry I want, I'm going to go through here and make some changes. So I'll change this to be labeled paint and change it to a blue color. And then I'll add an additional V-Ray material, and I'll call this metal. So the powerful thing about V-Ray is being able to blend materials. So let's add a texture to do that blending. So I'm going to select two textures here. I want the bomb link. I want to add the correct texture, which is the sphere mask 3. So I can now take the rust and metal and blend them with our texture. So then we get to see some variance in the two. And our metal's not quite reflective enough, so let's turn on some reflection. And let's change the reflection glossiness, which makes the reflection less sharp. So that's starting to look really good, but I'd like to see some bump to it, some breakup. So we'll add the V-Ray material bump, and we'll plug in the texture. Now that might be a bit too much, so let's tone the bump multiplier down. And that's starting to look really good. So now we'll work on the sphere a little bit. We'll add another metal. And again, let's add a V-Ray material blend, and we'll mix in the metal, and then we'll mix that in with a mask from our second texture. We'll swap the inputs by selecting Shift X. Yeah, that's starting to look really good. So let's change a little bit of the values here on the metal. Give it a little bit of color. A little too much red though. There we go. And with this metal, we'll want to bump up the reflection color, and then we'll change the highlight glossiness to be a little less sharp. So again, let's add a V-Ray material bump and plug in a mask. And because we'll want to probably color correct these two separately in the comp a little bit later, since we're already in the comp, we'll add a V-Ray material wrapper and set our material ID for that one and for that one. And then we'll add a V-Ray render element to our scene. We want that to be our multimat. Red object is 1, green object is 2. Check the use material IDs checkbox, and there we get our mat. And as we go through our layers, we can also add another V-Ray render element. And we'll have that be our reflection. We'll add diffuse. And specular. And of course we'll want our Z depths. Now we can see those channels in our viewer. Just for cleanup, we'll make this be a V-Ray element scene. We'll check out the diffuse color and the reflection and our specular. So once we have a set of V-Ray render elements we like, we can group those into a tool set. So we'll call that V-Ray channels. And then if we want to bring that in another scene, we can just say V-Ray channels in our tool sets, and that brings us in that selection of elements, and we can just pop in here and update our multimat if we want to change any colors and what channels it's called. So we've taken a look at the V-Ray material preview, and then also building an entire scene from scratch using a V-Ray proxy node, V-Ray material nodes, a texture for a couple of the pieces of geometry, and the V-Ray render elements.